Hey, we're live. Well, actually, we
We're not
are
live.
not true live,
We're
but
cyborgs.
the- exactly, something like that. We are doing something special for you guys. We are doing some pre recorded episodes just so we can continue to give you guys some more tips and some more content. And so, even though it's not a true live, we do have people from either the Overflow Worship team or the NLFX Pro team who will be popping in and answering your questions and comments. And so, be sure to stay active in the comments, asking questions because we still want to hear from you and get those questions answered.
Yeah.
So,
And your comments and questions will help us with future shows.
yeah,
Again, you may be the voice for many.
yeah, absolutely. It really does help us because when we chat about what content we're, curating for upcoming episodes, it really is based on what you guys are saying because we want it to be relevant to kind of your current circumstances and what you're facing. So, keep up the chatting and the commenting. It's helpful for us too.
Big time.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about something that it's a broad topic. I know, Ben. I know it's just one of those that it's hard to, do it in, 15 or 20 minutes, right? So we're going to take just a summary overview because I think it's really helpful. So today we're going to talk about EQ and just give basics and overview, right, Ben?
Yeah, and I think we're going to narrow it down and speak specifically to vocals. A lot of things are translatable. Once you understand what you're hearing and where that lands on an EQ, I think that you can apply that to anything. And probably a great kicking off point is to say that a friend of mine, touring engineer, says if it sounds good, it is good. So,
Yeah.
we're going to try to give you some general guidance, a general walkthrough of what you're hearing and how that lands on an EQ. And we're going to do so discussing vocals, but then encourage you to go out and, practice and try things and see how it sounds and develop your own flavor, as it were.
Yeah. Yeah, because uh, I mean, I am nowhere near as experienced as you are with EQing, but the
Don't
experience
feel
that I
bad. I
have.
can't sing. So
Yeah. There you go. We all have our giftings, right?
that's right.
But from what I do know about it is there is a certain level of like trial and error once you understand the basics behind it and kind of what you're dealing with. Some of it you just have to, crank up the low end. So what does that sound like? Oh, that sounds terrible. Okay. And just try it and do, when I'm doing my own recording, sometimes if I'm not sure, I will just sweep and just
Hmm.
kind of boost and sweep and try to figure out what am I hearing? Where is that? Where does that sit? And so we're
That's a
gonna
great practice. I mean, that is a super, super smart way to do it.
okay. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I wondered, I'm like, well, I'm just gonna make this up as I go. But I did take some classes too, which I think one of my professors in that class gave me that tip because I was struggling with some just trial and error. So as we walk into, this basic overview to start, one of the things that I hear from the churches I work with are some of these buzzwords. We hear boomy, right? We hear it's piercing or it sounds like tin or, oh, the S's, her S's are hurting my ears. We hear those kinds of things. And even things like it's just too loud. And
Yeah,
that's not often a volume issue. It could be an EQ issue. And so let's
absolutely.
let's start there and then we can move on.
All right. Well, let's do this first. Let's talk about the various types of EQs. And today we're just going to talk about parametric EQ. And if
Okay.
you're using a small analog board, I'll show you something that kind of ties it all back to that. And then I'm going to encourage you to go have a bake sale and get something else. But but because
Yes.
there are different types of EQs. There are graphic EQs, which have the vertical faders maybe that are assigned to frequencies, maybe in thirds of an octave. But I think a parametric EQ is really your best friend, and that's what we're going to work with today. So to start off, let me find something I can share here.
Okay.
And perfect. Excuse me. Here, let's pull up. This is a multi-band parametric EQ,
Okay.
and what we can see is each dot represents a frequency.
Mm-hmm.
And this one here at the bottom, this is a low cut, and I can change how much of a roll off there is. but, and when I say roll off, I mean that this EQ is cutting frequencies, in this case, below 106.
Okay.
Now, the nice thing about a parametric or adjustable low cut or high pass, sometimes you'll hear them called, and I think we've talked about that, high pass
Yes.
everything, right?
Yes.
Is that we can adjust that. So, for, you know, really deep male vocal, maybe I could come down in here. Maybe for a female vocal, I'm up in here.
Okay.
There's no magic number. If you had to pick one, call it 100. But
Okay.
here again, it's okay, like you said, to move it around a little bit. And then here we can find these other bands, and we're going to talk about where some of those sounds you described might live.
Okay.
But one thing I really love about a parametric EQ is exactly as you described, where I can cut or boost very dramatically.
Hmm.
Uh, and I can also choose how narrow or wide that filter is.
Yes.
So if I'm not sure where I'm going, I might go kind of narrow,
Okay.
and I might boost it a little bit. Don't go too crazy, but crazy enough that you can hear what's going on, and then, like you said, you can move it around and see what happens, and say, "Whoa, oh, there it is. Let's get rid of that. Oh, that's much better."
Yeah. Yeah. So just before you move on, so I know that, studio context and live context are apples and oranges, very different when it comes to
Very
how you're
different.
EQing and all of that. So in the recording world, when we're talking about mixing and mastering, they say, well, if you're mastering and you have to boost or cut something more than, 4 dB, there's a problem. You need to go back to your mix, to your initial. So, how does that translate to live context? Because we're talking about, church settings, live contexts. Is there a point where it's like, okay, if you have to boost it this much or cut it this much, there might be a bigger issue?
I'm reluctant to put a number on that.
Okay.
And again, if you put 10 sound guys or gals in a room, you would probably get 11 opinions.
Okay.
I'm
Got it.
reluctant to put a number, but bear in mind that 3 dB represents double the power, 6
Okay.
dB quadruple the power. So we are adding, voltage and gain to this when we boost things, and
Yep.
we are reducing it when we cut things. So I think what I would say, and I was actually going to make this point anyways, I think it's a good place to do it, is if we
Okay.
find ourselves doing something, crazy, like cutting everything.
Yeah.
I've seen church EQs look like this. They're trying to hunt down feedback. Listen, that you got a different problem.
Okay.
you
Okay.
know, you're
Yeah.
not going to fix it with EQ. You got a way different problem here.
Okay.
Uh, that you're essentially using the EQ as a volume control at that point.
Yes. So it's more like looking for dramatic things, like you're boosting a ton or you're cutting everything, then it's a different issue, but
Yeah,
there's
something's
not
really
really
wrong.
a
In
number
the live world, you
necessarily.
could run into things where you have to make more substantial cuts or boosts.
Yep.
Live is much more sometimes damage control.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, there. Anyway, that's another. I don't want to keep us on schedule here,
Yes,
but
exactly.
one
Okay.
thing that I want to say that's really important too is that it's always better to cut than boost.
Okay.
Now that doesn't mean we would never boost, not at
Right.
all. But rather than boosting everything to accomplish what could have been done with one cut,
Yes.
that would be much better to cut than boost. Plus, remember, every time we add here, we're adding to the gain. We're cutting into our headroom. So
Yeah.
the other thing is there is a thing I think as too much EQ. If
Yeah.
you're on a lower cost board, which the majority of our viewers probably are,
Hmm.
you have a nonlinear EQ. So you could start adding latency. Every filter you add is latency. On the higher end touring consoles, Digico, that sort of thing, we have linear EQs that are able to compensate for that and not add latency relative to the filter. But anyway, just be aware that
Yeah.
there's all these really complicated trade-offs that are happening in the physics realm that you don't really want to have to deal with. So if
Yeah.
you're EQing a ton, that's probably a problem.
Okay.
It's creating a new set of problems for you. So just
Yeah.
what's necessary, like flavoring a soup, right? So
Right. Right. Just a little bit of salt, not the whole can.
a couple other, and these are not hard and fast rules. They are
Okay.
general, because again, it's very artistic here. But
Right.
generally, I like to have my boosts be a little bit wider,
Okay.
and my cuts be a little bit narrower.
Okay.
But again, we have the ability here, to choose what we're taking out and where,
Yeah.
and how much. That's why I like the parametric EQ. The parameters can be adjusted, and that's where we get the name parametric EQ.
Okay.
So let's take a look at what some of these might mean. Is this a vocal EQ? Well, I don't know, maybe,
Yeah.
maybe not. I did do some things sort of purposefully here that, you might see,
Mm-hmm.
but there is no right answer. It's going to depend very much on the vocalist. It's going to depend very much on the microphone,
Mm-hmm.
and a few other factors. One thing I will say before we move on is if you find that on every channel, you're putting in a cut right here,
Yep.
well, that should just be done on the mains then.
Got
It's
it. Yes.
if you're taking it out on every channel, you're using up an EQ filter that you could otherwise have available for something else,
Got it.
and it could just be done once on the mains. Maybe the whole system has a bit of mud right here, and you just need to get rid
Yeah.
of that.
Okay.
Something else that I kind of did on purpose is I had this sort of laid out with my 200 and my 2K, and I
Mm-hmm.
I find that those are the battlegrounds. I will win the twos, uh,
Okay.
or the threes, somewhere between 2 and 3. But it gets us in the neighborhood. It helps us remember that, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And you mentioned saying something might sound too loud, but it isn't a question of actual sound pressure.
Yep.
Uh, our ears are very much attuned to the vocal range, and the peak of that tends to be right in here at 2K. So
Yep.
2K tends to sound really harsh to us, really grating. Kind of like almost babies' cries are deliberately grating to our ears to make us pay
Yes.
attention to them.
Right. Yes.
So you can find that, again, if you can win those battlegrounds, this will control a lot of that mud and intelligibility, and this will control a lot of that harshness. You can have a really nice loud mix that doesn't sound obnoxious. And here's a good
Yep.
example. Go take a clock radio and crank it up. It will sound loud, but it
Right.
doesn't have a lot of sound pressure to it.
Right.
So you don't want to sound like a clock radio.
No. No.
Let me pull up I've got a little I did an overlay here.
Okay. Oh, that's
And
great.
yeah, this kind of shows us some words that we might hear, and there's lots of different words. You musician types, you come up with all kinds of crazy stuff. Like
I
I need
know
a little
we
more
do.
unicorny.
Yeah.
What does that even mean? Nobody knows what that means.
A little more unicorny. There was
Yeah.
a word I heard this. I'll have to think of it, but it was a new one. I was like, oh, that's new. I know what you mean, but that's new.
Yes.
Very
So
artistic.
you kind of have to, and sometimes you have to ask, and I think we should do a show on uh, communication between musicians and sound people, because
Oh,
that
yeah.
there might be ways to improve that. But excuse
Absolutely.
me. Right off the get-go here, we talked about the low cut, the high pass. This is
Yep.
going to be our rumble,
Okay.
handling noise, stage noise, and frankly, things we don't want or need. There is no
Okay.
human vocal coming out here, so we don't want or need it anyway. Let's just get rid of it.
Okay.
And like I said, I high pass virtually everything, even kick drum. Now it's going to be a lot lower. I'm going to move that high
Sure.
pass way down there, but I'm still going to get rid of stuff I don't need or want.
Yep.
Now, one of the really cool things about modern digital consoles is that they will often have real-time analyzers overlaid with the EQ, so we can actually see RTA bars in here showing us what that signal is. So it kind of helps us, like you said, about moving around. You don't really know where to go.
Yeah.
Over time, your ears will learn and your sweeps will get
Mm.
shorter. You'll kind of know
Yeah.
where to start. And the RTA bars give you a little head start with that, where you go, well, I can clearly see she's not singing anything below 100 hertz anyway. So I guess I could
Yes.
probably start there.
Yes.
And then again, listen. There's no magic number. Just listen and go, does it sound better here or here?
Mm-hmm.
Because everything has a trade off. Everything we do has a trade off. So, we got our rumble here, our boominess here. I really find that I like to take out a lot between that 2 and 300. But again, we don't want it to sound, thin.
Right.
When we get into the boxy range, if we start taking out too much of the boxy stuff, it might sound hollow now.
Yep.
So you really have to listen, very much a
Mm-hmm.
listen thing. And something else, probably getting way ahead of us in this show, EQ in context. So
Sure.
oftentimes we will EQ a channel and we're listening to it individually, but then when we bring the whole mix together, it's different.
Yeah.
So we have to think about the context of the whole mix. And that is, I said that deliberately as I moved on to bite, because
Yes.
this is where we find a lot of conflict with guitars, particularly electric, with synth, that
Mm-hmm.
sort of stuff. But it's also where we start having some of the presence and things of our vocals. That's kind of the meat
Yep.
of it right there,
Yep.
you know.
Yep.
400 to 4K is the vocal range. So we got to find a way to make everybody coexist here
Yep.
so that we don't make it harsh, but we also don't lose our vocals.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And then we start moving into sibilance, and I can't ever hear that word again without thinking of the skit, on TV, sibilance, sibilance.
Yeah.
So it's for,
Yes.
forever in my head. That and more cowbell, the inspirations to be a
Oh,
sound person.
yes. Yes, more cowbell. Please. It's what every sound engineer wants. It's just more cowbell.
You can't have too much cowbell. But sibilance, this is where things like de-essers live, and where you were talking
Okay.
about somebody's, sounds like a snake pit,
Yeah. Yes.
uh, we might go in there and hunt that out a little bit and say, okay,
Mhm.
I got too much, of the, the tongue and the S's, and, everything's really hissy. Maybe I'll, cut that out.
Yep.
Again, this is, I think, an area you want to be a little bit more surgical,
Yeah.
just because
More
otherwise you
narrow.
start taking out the shape of the letters too, the shape of the words.
Yep.
And then up here, I would call this, air, I guess,
Hmm.
the really ultra top end.
Yeah.
Couple things to bear in mind here. One is most of us can't hear much over 15K anyway.
Right. Right.
So be careful there. That's a place you can get in trouble, particularly with people who can hear it.
Uh-huh. Yes. They run
So,
away.
yes, you see people start going, "Gah." Maybe you
Yes.
should just, duck and cover there.
It was
Uh,
me.
so I think that's, you know, I feel like we've talked about this, and I don't remember if it was live at your conference or in a previous show,
Okay.
but not just talking to people on stage, but hearing, feedback from parishioners and,
Mm-hmm.
worship leaders,
Yep.
they may not know exactly how to tell you what they want to tell you.
Right.
So you may have to listen to words like unicorny or something, and you may just discount it and say, you have no idea what you're talking about. But
Yeah.
maybe they do. Just
Yep.
accept the feedback. In fact, seek the feedback. And, if
Yep.
somebody says, well, it's a little harsh, maybe you can't hear over 10K,
Right. Well, and it's one thing to have one person say it, and then like you
Right.
say, it's like, okay, we'll consider it. Of course, we take it and consider it. But if there's multiple people saying the same thing, then we have to kind of come with the humility to say like, all right, I'm gonna take a look at this because it's obviously bothersome. And I know the church that we were at for a lot of years, I think it was location of the booth. The booth
Oh,
was
yeah.
like kind of elevated. And so I think that when people sat down on the ground in certain areas in the room, it really was offensive, because you couldn't hear that from the height of the booth. And so we always, tried to encourage our sound engineers, like, it's not personal. It's really this room, and it was a new space, and we just had to learn the space. So,
That big time. Absolutely. Your coverage may be that where you're at sounds great. The mix sounds great to you, and that's why you mixed it that way. But if you move into one area of the sanctuary, or like you said, you're at a different level. In fact, one of the first years that I spoke at your conference, somebody said our booth is in the balcony, and I
mm-hmm.
said, is there anybody sitting in the balcony? They said no, and I said, you got it out of the balcony.
Yep.
you know, you're not a pro engineer. There's no way you're going to do that translation in your head in real time. Get on the
Right.
floor, where
Yep.
the people are. Um, I am a pro, and I wouldn't be in the balcony. I'd be like, no way, I can't do that.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
so let's move on to some fun stuff here.
Yes. Let's do
Uh,
it.
excuse me. This is my friends at Rational Acoustics. They make a software called Smart, which is an acoustic measurement software, and they have the 7 Bad System Dwarves. And I encourage everybody to go take a look at this and check it out.
This is cool.
It is super cool. I don't know who drew this for them, but anyway, they've been around a long time, and I just it's like the cartoon personification of what we hear, but I love that because
Yeah.
these are some of those words you hear and you kind of get to sort of imagine it. Tubby, okay, we can imagine that. He's a big old tuba, the muddy
Yeah.
sound, the boxy sound. We can see he's got a bullhorn here, like a cheerleading horn. So you
Uh-huh.
start to visualize that.
That's
And then
really cool.
Honky's got a trumpet, which is very much Honky is
Mm-hmm.
really where like the horns of your speakers kind of like to thrive a little bit. It sounds very state fairish,
Yes. Yeah.
you know,
Uh-huh. Yes.
and that leads us right like and Honky and Barky, they're constantly like running on the street together. Like those two together are bad news. I think they're like
Yes.
up to no good for sure. And then
Yes.
Edgy, of course, you can see I love he's got the microphone sticking right in the speaker. Uh,
Yes.
and then Sibilant, yeah,
There he is. He's in pain.
yeah, and so are we.
I know this. And just so you guys know, as you're watching this, we will have the link posted along with this video. So is that possible to do, Ben, so that people can just pop to this link
I am
directly
sure
from the
that it
video?
is, but yeah, we'll be happy to get anybody the link. But you can see it's at Rational Acoustics. They even have T-shirts and sweatshirts you can
That's
buy with
amazing.
this on there if you really want to rock that.
Cool.
Uh, I do not get any credit or money from them if you do, but I wish I did. So I reach out to
Yeah.
the guys at Rational Acoustics. Actually, they have these great like little padded gig bags too, and I mean I use
Oh,
them all the
nice.
time. Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah. Anyway,
Very cool.
but Rational Acoustics guys, if you're watching, I'm a t-shirt size large. So anyway,
Perfect.
I'm,
Ben wants to wear.
I know they're not.
Yeah.
So let's do this. Let's take and overlay our dwarves onto what we just looked at here. So now we can kind of see where everybody lives in the spectrum,
Yep.
and you can kind of see like right here is where that mud's at, and
Yep.
down here we don't want that. Up here, the sibilant range to the air range, proceed with caution. Like we said, it can be
Yeah.
very jarring to people. Um, so just sort of, but it also can, it's there for a reason. Everything has a trade-off, right? Otherwise we just get rid of all of it, right? If it was all bad, we just get rid of all of it. No, then we just
Right.
turned everything down.
Yep. Yep.
And like I said, it depends on very much what your source is, what your microphone is, and a few other circumstances. But again, here we can see these guys are just living right together. They're just kind of hanging. Actually, you know what? Let's call these guys the Three Stooges, just hanging
That's
out there. I,
right.
I don't like any of them. That's come on, guys, get out of my
Yes.
signal. You're
Yep.
making my life hard. So
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, I love the visuals because I think everybody will just imagine that now. And it is really helpful to have that to recall and think, okay, so this I remember these little dwarves,
yes,
you
the
know.
seven bad system dwarves. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's so great. So,
Which
now
is good because when somebody goes, it sounds boxy. Now, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just
oh
wanted to
yeah.
put this in to say first, you have to assume that they know what they're talking about.
Yeah. Yep.
If they say it sounds boxy, but they mean sibilant, that isn't very helpful. So you still need
Right.
to kind of, sort through that.
Yeah, maybe ask some clarifying questions
Yeah.
of
What do you mean? What don't you like about it? Yeah.
yes, exactly.
What's
Yeah.
wrong with you?
What is the matter with you?
Don't do that.
Don't. Yeah, don't do that, friends.
Yeah. Please don't do that.
uh, so, earlier in the show, you made a reference to how that would look on an analog board. You had a visual for that as well. Is this a good place to segue into that last visual?
I think it is. I think it really, really is a good spot. So I'm going to jump first back to our parametric EQ because I want everybody to remember this
Yep.
and what we had, how we had width of filter and we had placement of filter. We can get very surgical with this. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to move to my graphic for an analog board.
Mm-hmm.
Note that this will be different from one board to the next. Okay.
Yeah.
This is a Soundcraft signature series. And here we can see the EQ section.
Yep.
And what we can see is we have a fixed high frequency. We have a sweepable mid, which means we can move that. We can change the frequency of the mid.
Okay.
And then down here, we have a fixed low frequency.
Mm-hmm.
And so these tend to be shelving EQs on the high and the low. And
Okay.
on the right, we can see that result. And we can see, it shows us what that might look like if it were a parametric EQ, so we can understand that correlation. And you can see why I'm so much bigger fan of a parametric EQ.
Yeah.
One, I cannot change where this EQ filter starts,
Yep.
and I've got a little bit of stuff I don't want here, right? But maybe I don't want. But you can see that it is just a shelf.
Right.
It's, if I'm trying to address the sibilant range, I'm getting the air too, whether I want it or not.
Yep. Yep.
So sort of trying to do surgery with a scoop shovel.
Which is a terrifying visual.
Yeah, I'm a farm kid. It's all I can think of. I'm like,
I know. I'm
what would
like,
I have handy? A
oh.
scoop shovel, I guess. All right, yeah.
To the mom who had 3 C-sections, I'm going, oh, okay.
Sorry to do that to you.
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
But it's true. I mean, I know exactly
You want
what
your
you're
doctor
saying.
to have a scalpel.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're saying, though, because it's like the reason that you said, you can work with what you have, but then maybe hold a bake sale to try and get to a digital board where you can use a parametric EQ because of the additional control that you can have. You can just
Absolutely
manage so much more.
I do want to call out something here on this Soundcraft board, something that's really nice that they do, because they understand. Again, they build boards, they build touring class boards. I love the VI series. Just looks like a rocket ship. You got screens everywhere. It's not very practical for me, and I used to have a VI6, and I'm much happier using a Digico desk now. But anyway, it's a super cool board because, again, it looks like you're launching rockets. Screens everywhere. It's really cool. But anyway. So they've precipitated that know-how down into some of their smaller boards. So what you can see here, remember me saying that we want maybe wider boosts and narrower cuts? They've built that into the EQ for you, so that your boosts are always wider and your cuts are always narrower. Now, if you don't want that, too bad. You're getting it anyway.
Right.
If it isn't right for your application, tough luck. You're getting it anyway.
Yep.
That's why I don't like analog boards for these types of applications. If you're mixing a worship team in church, analog board is tough sledding. If you're doing 1 or 2 mics in a conference room for corporate, fine. It's fine. Same here on the low frequency. And we can see that, again, it's asymmetric, that it's more of a shelf as we cut, and it's more of a bell as we boost. So they have built in a little bit of help for us. But again, we can't change where that EQ filter starts. We can't move it to where the problem exists. So we're going to have some unintended consequences there.
Yeah.
Just can't get around it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, this has all been really helpful. And I think it's a great conversation starter because, as we said at the beginning, I mean, we could go on and on and on, I'm sure, for a really long time and have a lot of Q&A and all of that, because there's so much that's relevant to the individual context as well, and the room and all of that. So I think we could wrap up here and just encourage everybody to write your questions in the comments, because we want to hear, what has got your wheels turning and how can we continue to, help guide the conversation, because this is just a starting point, and we want to help you from there.
You will not learn to ride a bike if you never sit on one. So, and you have to get on a board and just try things, and you have to be willing to make mistakes. Best time to do that's when there's no audience, right?
Right.
But you have to be willing to put some stuff through the board, try some things, go a little nuts with it. Like Andrea said, just start moving around and go, oh, what's that sound like? What's that sound like? Oh, I don't like that. Oh, that's not bad.
Yeah.
But that's how it's built. That's how Rome was built, one brick at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. We can't wait to hear your comments and your questions, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.